Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to the show. Um, we're gonna start the English version of Tea Time, where we listen to um, a, a story that will be in English about family, usually family. So, and we will talk about it. We'll discuss it. Is there anything you want to say about the story, about what's going on? I'll give you the opportunity to come and talk about it if you want to talk about it. If you don't want to talk about it, then that's a different story. Um, you can just listen. You can just listen and enjoy. So let's start.
In the Atlanta airport with only $52 in my pocket and a backpack. She left with her new husband and his two children, not even bothering to look back, as if I had never existed in her life. Hello, you are watching Family Ashes. If the person who's supposed to love you most abandons you in a strange place, what would you do? Wait in despair or find a way to survive on your own? Please comment your thoughts and remember to follow the channel to see the full story. My name is Claire Thompson, I'm 16, a high school student, and the age when I should have been worrying about math tests or the school dance turned into the moment my life was shoved into a dead end. That day I stood in the enormous terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, where announcements echoed constantly and families reunited with hugs after long trips. Amid that flow of people, I stood alone, clutching my small, worn backpack, my pocket holding just $52, not enough to buy a bus ticket home, let alone a plane ticket. I had no plan, no way back, no one to cling to. A few meters away, my mother leisurely dragged a brand new Louis Vuitton suitcase, striding confidently beside her new husband and his two children, who always looked groomed as if pulled from an advertising photo. I remember clearly the moment she adjusted her sunglasses and gave a faint smile before turning her back and walking away, as if my presence didn't merit a second thought. No instructions, no hug, not even a glance back. Only me, standing swallowed by that vast space, swallowing the salt of the tears that welled up. In that instant I realized, I had been left behind, like excess luggage she didn't want to pay to check. And that truth was so heavy my chest felt like it might explode. My hands were still cold as I punched in the numbers, my fingers trembling so much the phone screen jittered as if trying to escape from me. Everything around blurred, the airport announcements, the hurried footsteps, the clack of rolling suitcases all seemed to come from another world. I remembered my mother speaking of him in a tone that tried to swallow the words, "Your father abandoned us, he's nothing but a failure." She repeated that until I almost believed it completely. Yet now, in the moment when only I remained among a sea of strangers, he was the only choice left who might reach out his hand to me. Thinking that, my heart felt like it might leap right out of my chest. The first 3 rings, I told myself not to hope too much. The 4th, the 5th, everything stretched on endlessly, then finally there was a click of connection, a long silence as if someone had gripped the air. Then a voice came through, deep, warm, and steady in a way I had never heard from anyone else but him. Claire? Just that one word, but it held surprise, a pause, and then a small question, like a man trying to guess what lay behind that name. I lost control, sobs and hiccups burst out before I could arrange my words. Dad. I'm at the airport. Can you help me? My voice sounded torn, as if pieces of me were falling apart on the cold tile. There was another pause, but this time it wasn't hesitation, it was as if he took a breath, gathered himself, then threw me a lifeline. Tell me exactly where you are. Which concourse, which gate, he asked, his voice slow but decisive, no scolding, no judgment, only a question to keep me from drifting away. I rattled off the gate name and the color of the shirt I was wearing, little details I was surprised I still remembered. As I spoke, I could hear him inhale deeply, like a man plotting a route in his head. Don't move. Stay right there. I'm coming. Each word he spoke felt like a promise, a simple safety I had longed for but didn't dare admit. Standing alone in that sea of people, I bowed my head into my hands, tears soaking my palms, and for the first time since my mother turned away, I felt a small, real piece of steadiness settle into my chest. Someone was willing to come for me right then. The ringing on the other end cut through the space like a needle, each chime making my heart jump. I counted the rings in my head, then heard the click of connection, a silence so long it made my ears hum, and then, finally, a voice, deep, warm, and steady, came through the line. Claire? Just that one word, but it carried a whole world, surprise, a question, and a gentle curiosity as if the man were looking at an unread page. My throat closed, and tears spilled uncontrollably. My crying was not a weak, hopeless sound but a broken sound, mixed with shame and a desperate need to be saved. Dad, it's me, I said, my voice cracking, every word heavy as stone. I'm at the airport. Please, can you help me? I don't know how those words came out, I only knew that when they left my mouth, part of me felt lighter, because at least I had done what I needed to do. There was a pause after I spoke, but this one didn't feel cold, it felt like he was listening, measuring, and arranging something in his head. Then he took a deep breath. That inhale over the phone amid the airport noise made me feel strangely safe, and he said, his voice deliberate but firm, tell me which gate you're standing at, describe the clothes you're wearing. Don't move.
Fill your bagel? Of course. Fill your potatoes, eggs, and pasta? Hello, creaminess. Philadelphia, a creamy touch of magic.
How can I tell if there's suspicious activity on my account?
Capital One's top-rated mobile app has real-time alerts and the ability to lock your debit card.
Nice.
Switch to easy banking with no fee, no minimum, Capital One 360 checking.
Stay put. Those words were simple and certain, like an anchor for my mind. I babbled the details, gate number, shirt color, my old shoes, even the freight backpack. As I spoke I could picture him unfolding a map, calculating the route, circling numbers on a sheet of paper. He didn't sound hurried or judgmental, only quietly determined and warm, which made me less shaky. He told me to sit down, not to go anywhere, not to let anyone know where I was, and that he would come. When he said I'm coming, that phrase was more than a promise. To me then, it was a lifeline. Someone would come and pull me out of this place, someone who would not abandon me again. Tears soaked my cheeks, but they were different tears, heavy, yet with a trace of relief, as if for the first time in years I was allowed to breathe without guilt. I left the phone in my hand, listening to footsteps on the tiled floor and the flight announcements, but everything seemed distant. Only the simple promise of the man on the line remained, a promise I had stopped being sure existed in the story my mother had told. There was a moment of stillness in my life that I will engrave forever. The screen showed connected, and through the background noise of the airport a voice emerged, deep, steady, carrying the cadence of someone who had been through a lot, a single call of my name, Claire? But in that call there was something like a missing piece of time being touched, like an old door creaking open after being shut for a long time. I felt my body as if someone had gently touched it. All the surrounding noise receded, the announcements, the rolling suitcases, the stranger's chatter compressed into a faint background hum, leaving only that voice and my heart beating faster, as if about to break out of my chest. Tears came unbidden, sliding down before I could stop them, and the words that tumbled from my mouth were not rehearsed or clever pleas but the most honest, simple thing: Dad, I need your help. Each word felt laden with the past, heavy with years of my mother snuffing at hope, heavy with nights I lay awake listening to the wind on the ceiling and imagining another hand. Heavy with the feeling of being abandoned that I had never found from anyone else. My voice broke into pieces, sometimes choking, sometimes rasping. In my speech there was shame for having to call, for a youth distorted to the point of begging for help, but there was also a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope I didn't have the courage to name. In the brief silence after I spoke, I imagined all the possibilities. He would refuse, ask why I called now. He would repeat what my mother taught me, that he had abandoned us, that I should not expect anything, or worse, the line would go dead and my plea would fall into nothingness. That feeling made the air around me viscous, as if the whole airport held its breath waiting for an answer. Then his voice returned, not scolding, not blaming, just deep and steady like a slab of stone set down in a storm. Tell me where you are. Stay put. I'm coming. And when he said I'm coming, in that plain phrase there was a safety I had thought I would never taste again, a simple but solid commitment, no conditions, no excuses, just a direct lifeline to my broken heart. The surge inside me was not just relief, it was a strange mixture of collapse and rebirth. I cried like someone emptied of water, my hands still clutching the phone as if holding a life, my throat tight, but the hiccups now carried a different tone, one of trust, as if a small corner of the world had settled back into place. I stammered out my location, described my clothes, described the frayed backpack I was clutching. The words tumbled messy but certain, and as I spoke, a small whisper rose within me: no matter what, despite a past that had imprisoned me with false words and lessons, this moment, a phone call, a returned dad, had opened a crack of light big enough for me to step through. When I heard his voice clearly, "Tell me where you are. I'm coming right now," my heart felt as if someone had just fastened a sturdy rope to pull me out of the abyss swallowing me. The voice held no tremor, not a hint of hesitation. It was straightforward and decisive, like an order that was also a promise. I had prepared for 100 different scenarios. He would refuse, he would question, he would hang up. But what I received was absolute certainty, a concise sentence that left me staring, unable to believe my ears. I took a long breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking into sobs, then began to stammer the description. I'm at Hartsfield, Jackson, near Gate D6. I'm wearing a gray hoodie, faded blue jeans, a black backpack with frayed straps. I have an old pair of sneakers, the laces are a bit ripped. I described every detail until I felt embarrassed at myself, but he didn't interrupt. He let me speak, letting each tiny piece of information fall out as if he were gathering them to assemble the most accurate picture of me. On the other end, beyond his voice, I could only hear a slow, steady breath, which made me clearly feel his presence, his attention, unwavering for even a moment. I sniffled, tears still streaming, and he repeated, this time more slowly, each word like a sealed pledge: "I'll be there right away." I didn't know where he was or how he would get to me, but the way he emphasized right away made me trust him absolutely. I believed that at that moment he was standing up, hurrying out the door, calling someone to prepare a vehicle, a route to reach me.
Those
I looked around the terminal, saw families embrace.
who just joined, this is a story about the girl that was left at the airport by her mother. She left her daughter to go with a new husband. She has a new husband, she has a new man, so she left. And so she has no money with her, nowhere to go. So she decided to call her dad to let him know, hey, I'm at the airport. My mother left me there. So can you come and find me? Hey Isa, how are you? I hope you're doing good. So that's where we are on the story. So she's waiting for the dad to come back. So the dad is coming to get her at the airport where mom left her. So you still listening?
racing, children laughing as they jumped into their parents' arms, and the sharp pain in my chest shifted into something else, hope. A tiny hope, trembling but real. And when I slumped into the seat, clutching the phone to my chest, I knew my life had turned a corner at that instant. For the first time in many years, someone promised to come for me, not tomorrow, not when convenient, but right now, at that very moment. The yellow lights washed over the runway and the whole scene seemed draped in a dramatic veil. I still stood there, fingers gripping the strap of my backpack until the tips turned white. Inside my head a tangle of emotions spun, astonishment, fear, confusion and, something like hope, too fragile to name. The Gulfstream G600 had just come to a stop, its engine still rumbling like the roar of a proud beast, and then the door opened. A figure appeared at the top of the stairway, tall, wearing a navy suit that hugged his strong frame. I squinted, trying to make out the face under the glare, and my heart nearly stopped when I met those eyes, the same deep brown I saw in the mirror every morning. In that moment, all the surrounding noise, the announcements, the hurried footsteps of airport staff, even the whistling wind, faded away. Only he remained, walking down the steps, steady, slow but sure, as if nothing could stop him. I felt a lump in my throat and tears rose again, not from anguish or despair this time, but from a shock in my chest. He had really come. Not a dream, not an idle promise over the phone. He stood there, real and tangible. Before I could gather myself, he moved straight toward me. The security officer blocking the way hesitated, but the look in his eyes made them step back. He pulled a stack of papers from his leather briefcase and placed them in the officer's hand, his voice low and firm, "I am the child's legal father." No shouting, no threats, yet the force in his voice left them no grounds to refuse. A tense silence passed, then the officer nodded and motioned for me to come forward. My legs felt like they no longer belonged to me as I took short, unsteady steps toward him. And then, before I could say a word, he opened his arms wide, his gaze locked on me, containing more than words could hold. When he hugged me, all the defenses I had built collapsed. I buried my face in his shoulder and smelled the familiar scent of wood smoke and faint cologne, a scent that suggested solidity I had never known in my life. His voice grew hoarse, each word sinking into me, "I've waited for you for too long, Claire." Those words were not merely consolation, they felt like a truth he had kept hidden for years. I broke down, sobbing, letting the tears soak his expensive suit. And in that embrace I realized something so simple it made my heart tremble. This time, I was truly being welcomed home, no longer the child left behind in a crowd of strangers. On the noisy, brightly lit runway, the man in the navy suit kept coming toward me, each step erasing the distance of the many years we had been apart. I could see his eyes clearly, deep, steadfast brown eyes, the same as mine, so much so that my chest tightened. My whole life I had looked in the mirror and wondered why I did not share my mother's gaze, why I always felt out of place in her house. And now, with a single meeting of eyes, I had my answer. Blood needs no proof, a look alone was enough.
Hitting your goals has nothing to do with discipline.
The real culprit is friction, and it slowly erodes your progress.
Unlike what most people believe.
He descended the final step without hesitation, not turning back, not glancing at anyone else. He looked straight at me, as if the whole world had vanished and only the two of us remained. Then he opened his arms. The gesture was both powerful and trembling, like a man who had forced himself to stand tall for years and had finally allowed a long-suppressed longing to surface. My vision blurred, my legs threatened to give out, I had never imagined I would be greeted like this. When his arms tightened around me, every defense I had built up fell away. The first thing I felt was solidity, his strong body, broad shoulders, large hands holding me like a wall against the world. Yet within that firm embrace I noticed a slight tremor, as if he too was battling the surge of emotion. I pressed my face to his chest, inhaled deeply, and the scent of his suit, incense like wood, faint smoke, and somewhere beneath it the leather, made me choke up. It was an unfamiliar scent, yet it gave me a safety I had never known. "I've waited for you for too long, Claire," he whispered, voice roughened, each syllable cracked as if carrying the weight of all the quiet years. The words felt like someone squeezing my heart. I sobbed uncontrollably, unable to keep up the tough facade I had constructed. Hot tears streamed down, wetting his expensive suit, but he paid no mind. His arms tightened further, as if afraid that letting go would make me vanish.
For those who just joined, So this story, it's about a girl that was left in the airport by her mother. Her mother decided that, you know, it was better for her to um to go somewhere else with a new husband. And so she said, you know what, I'm gonna leave you there and then come back. But she never did. She never came back.
Vanish again. In that embrace, I was not merely a forsaken child reunited with a relative, I felt healed. I cried for the empty birthdays without a father, for the times my mother cast harsh words at him, for the nights I lay awake wondering why I existed. I cried for all the years I believed I was unworthy of love. And now, all of that was erased by a single hug, a single whispered phrase. As his large, warm hand stroked my back slowly, I could hear his steady, heavy breaths. And I knew I was no longer the child left at the airport. I was the daughter who had been held by her father, who had been waited for across the years, and who was welcomed as an indispensable part of his life. In that embrace, for the first time in many years, I truly felt that I had a place to belong. The cabin door closed behind us, and in that instant the noisy roar of the runway seemed to be shut out, giving way to an oddly warm silence, no announcements, no hurried footsteps, only the faint scent of leather and the soft yellow lights overhead. The wide leather seat cradled me, so different from the cold plastic chairs in the terminal, and I sat there like a child who had just stepped into a wholly unfamiliar world, one where an adult stood behind to protect her. He sat opposite me, his hand resting on a thin fur throw, his gaze on me with a gentleness I had never seen from my mother. In the light, the lines on his face told of years gone by, but his voice was warm, steady, and calm. "You will live with me from now on," he said, not launching into long explanations, not condemning anyone, just a simple declaration with the weight of an anchor. "No one will ever abandon you again." Those words struck my heart like a stone that set off ripples of hope. I felt myself break open, not only because I had been taken away from the airport, but because for the first time someone spoke of my future with an unshakable certainty. Emotions came in no tidy order: relief, bewilderment, gratitude, a little guilt tucked away for ever having imagined this but not daring to believe it, and then a small, kindled resolve within me. I heard him breathe evenly, like a man trying to keep calm so his child wouldn't collapse again. He told me about the small practicalities. He had arranged a place for me at school, a temporary tutor, a therapist if needed, and a room on the hill he called home, but all of those were outward things. What truly moved me was what he said next, almost a whisper: "I'm here for you, not for anything else. I want you to know you have the right to be safe and to be loved." Those words were like a warm cloth draped over the broken pieces of my soul, making me cry without fully knowing why, crying for the empty years, for my mother's earlier words, for birthdays without anyone to blow out the candles with. While he spoke, I tried to marshal my emotions into reason so I wouldn't completely fall apart. I asked about my mother, about what would happen next, about how he had learned of everything. He answered slowly, unwilling to promise what he couldn't be sure of, but he made me believe that everything would be handled straightforwardly and responsibly. The way he put his hand over mine, the way he looked at me, not condescending, not self-satisfied, made me realize for the first time that safety is not something described by shouting or by gruesome revenge. It comes from steady actions, from the persistent presence of someone willing to shoulder responsibility for you. I sat there, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioning, the faint sense of leather and wood in the air, and felt a piece of myself begin to be mended. I knew the road ahead would not be all sunshine. There would be court hearings, accusations, perhaps sleepless nights when my mother screamed in frustration, but in that moment, as he held me and spoke those words, I was allowed to believe that someone would walk beside me through it all. That feeling of safety, simple, intimate, dulled the sharpness of the abandonment memories a little, and within me a small but firm decision grew. If I could choose again, I would choose to live, choose to fight for myself, and choose to accept love when it came. The SUV pulled up at the end of the drive, the iron gate sliding open softly like a theater curtain lifting to reveal the whole house before me. I thought I must be mistaken, because what stood there was not a house in the usual sense but an architectural work I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines in a dentist's waiting room. The enormous glass walls reflected the warm interior lights, interspersed with upright panels of light-colored stone, strong yet elegant. Above, the sloping roof stretched out, the lights of Atlanta below throwing a glow back up, making the whole house seem to hover between sky and earth. I froze, my hand still clutching the worn backpack, the straps frayed, the zipper dulled to silver. It looked so small and shabby against the setting, and I felt the same way, stranded, out of place, as if a single gust of wind might carry me out past that luxurious gate. But he simply opened the car door, stepped out, and held his hand out to me. No words, no urging, just a steady look that forced me to believe his hand was solid enough to lead me in. When the heavy wooden door swung open, a wave of warmth washed over us, carrying the scent of incense like wood, leather, and the faint smell of toast lingering from the kitchen. Inside, the soft yellow light spread across a living room so large that my footsteps echoed, a lonely sound in a space too perfect. Dark brown leather sofas were arranged neatly around a glass table, a large abstract painting hung above the fireplace, and farther in, a curved wooden staircase led to the second floor. Through the transparent glass I could see the city stretched out below, thousands of car lights linked together like threads of light. I hesitated on the threshold, half wanting to step in and half wanting to turn back to the car because I felt undeserving. I was used to a cramped apartment, the damp smell seeping through the walls, neighbors' arguments bleeding through the thin partitions. This opulence felt like another world, not meant for a girl who'd been abandoned with $52 in her pocket. Then he turned back, placed a hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. He didn't speak loudly, only gave a slight nod, his eyes serious but gentle, as if to say, "This is your home. No one can drive you away." In that moment, my whole being trembled in a different way. It wasn't fear anymore but the trembling of a nascent belief, fragile yet real, that perhaps, for the first time in my life, I had a place to belong. While I was still fumbling with my bewilderment, he led me to a room with glass walls that looked out over the city. The two of us sat facing each other in the wide, quiet space, hearing only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ticking of a wall clock. He poured me a glass of water, placed it gently on the table, then watched me silently, his gaze warm but measured, as if weighing where to begin. I gripped the glass tight, trying to keep myself steady, but the truth was my mind felt blank and my heart still raced from the shock I had just experienced. He sighed, bowed his head slightly, and then spoke in a slow voice, "Claire, over the years, it's not that I didn't look for you. I tried.
Wow, this is
But your
crazy.
mother cut off all contact. I sent letters, she returned them. I called, she blocked the numbers. Even my lawyer couldn't find a legal way to see you." I listened to each word, wanting to believe but feeling the familiar sting of bitterness rise. For years my mother had insisted he'd abandoned us, that he'd vanished and never thought of me again. And now he was telling a completely different story. He looked up, his eyes bright but carrying restrained pain. "Do you know what I've been doing all these years? I am not the failure your mother painted me to be. I built my own company, a tech company that now operates in several states. Everything I've done, from day one, was to prove to myself that I could protect you if one day you needed me." I went rigid, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. All the things my mother had planted in my head, that he was useless, that he only knew how to run away, suddenly crumbled, revealing a wholly different truth. I stared at his hands on the table, big, sinewy hands with a few old scars. Those were not the hands of someone who had given up, but of a person who had worked without rest. A pang of sorrow hit me, as if all those years someone had stolen my chance to know the truth, forcing me to believe lies. I swallowed hard, not knowing how to answer, and muttered, "But Mom always said, you didn't need me." His voice immediately hardened, stern yet trembling, "No. I never stopped wanting you. She kept you away from me." Those words fell like a hammer blow, both making my heart ache and opening a new path. I realized I had grown up living under a distorted version of the truth, and now, before me, according to him, had been improperly withdrawn from. Each detail he recited fit together like puzzle pieces, bank statements collected, internal emails leaked, all forming a picture convincing enough to strip my mother of her mask. I listened, relieved that someone stood on my side yet also feeling a vague pain as legal terms and numbers were read aloud. He did not speak of revenge with glee, he spoke of taking back what belongs to you, of freezing accounts if necessary, of sealing property to ensure you would not be dragged back into that chaotic life. At times he paused, checking my reaction, then gently, "I will not let you be hurt again. This has to be done." A jumble of emotions swirled inside me, joy, relief, but also a hollow spot called guilt. I wondered whether making my mother pay would burden my heart, whether the justice I demanded was truly what I needed to heal. He took my hand, squeezed lightly as if to pass along comfort. You don't have to decide now. I will be the one to handle it all. You only need to be safe and be allowed to grow up normally. Those words were like a warm blanket on a cold night. They eased my fears, but they did not erase the questions. And so the decision rested on his shoulders, while I stood caught between two streams of emotion. On one side, the newfound trust in the father who had returned, on the other, the image of the mother who had walked away without mercy. His words, "She will pay," echoed inside me, not just as a promise of legal consequences, but as a declaration that from now on, someone would fight to protect my share of life. I told myself I would follow every step of the case, not to water the seeds of hatred, but to make sure no one would ever again treat a daughter as something disposable, something left behind. That day, my father's study felt vast, but the air was so heavy I could hear the scratch of a pen on paper and the clipped strokes of a lawyer's keyboard. The glass window opened onto a panorama of Atlanta glowing brightly in the distance, but inside, the light was softer and weightier, as if the whole house was holding its breath for the outcome. I walked in quietly, afraid to interrupt. My father looked up, his reading glasses slipping slightly down his nose, his eyes still clear and resolute. He motioned me closer, his voice low but steady. "I've had the lawyers go through all the financial records. We can't let her keep using your money like this." I sat down in the leather chair opposite him, my palms cold and damp. Looking at the stacks of papers piled high in front of him, I saw a whole part of my life laid out as numbers, my name printed on accounts, regular withdrawals under the excuse of care and education that were in reality expensive vacations, designer bills, transfers into accounts under my mother and her new husband's names. I felt choked, humiliated, betrayed, as if even my identity had been reduced to a shell for someone else's profit. As I drowned in that chaos, my father's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, then put it on speaker. A woman's voice came through, shaky but firm. "David, it's Sarah. I can't stand by anymore. I've kept everything, emails, bank receipts, statements. I'll send it all to your lawyer. Claire deserves to know the truth." I froze. Aunt Sarah, my mother's youngest sister, the one I always thought stayed out of everything, avoiding conflict, now was the one breaking the silence. I couldn't get a word out, my chest swelling, both aching and strangely moved. Someone from my mother's side of the family had finally seen me, had dared to stand for me. The feeling made tears sting my eyes, but this time not just from pain, but from the recognition, even if it came late. My father looked at me and nodded slightly, pride and gratitude mingling in his eyes. "You see, Claire? The truth always finds its way into the light. She can't hide it forever." His lawyer came in immediately after, holding a stack of documents freshly printed from Sarah's email. Pages thick with numbers, timestamps, staggering sums draining from the trust fund meant for me. Each piece of evidence pointed straight at my mother: hotel bills in Miami, in Paris, transfers into her new husband's accounts, even absurd justifications in her emails. "This money is mine to use, Claire doesn't need that much." Reading that line, my stomach clenched as if punched. The pain wasn't only about the money lost but about the cruel assertion itself. Claire doesn't need that much. To my mother, I had never been a child who needed love, only a pretext to gain more wealth. I sucked in a shaky breath, feeling my blood boil in my veins. My father sat silently, but I could see the veins bulging on his hand as he gripped the table hard. "Enough," he said, his voice low but heavy as a hammer blow. "From now on, she will have nowhere to hide. I will take back everything that belongs to you." He turned to me, his gaze softening, and placed his large, steady hand over mine. "You don't have to carry this anymore. I will let the law speak. The only thing you must do is remember, you were never a burden, never something to be thrown away." I dropped my head, tears streaming, but inside a portion of my fear gave way to relief. For the first time, I felt I was not a lone person fighting injustice. Someone stood before me, ready to fight on my behalf. And that, in that moment, was more precious to me than any amount in those stacks of papers. I remember that afternoon clearly, when my father's lawyer put the final file on the desk and everything felt like it had been closed with a period. They had traced every transaction, from beachfront resort bills in Miami costing more than $10,000 a week, to clandestine transfers into a real estate company held in the name of my mother's new husband, a slick broker trying to funnel money into an unapproved project. Each number, each ledger note on the bank statements.
Pour ceux qui viennent de nous rejoindre, c'est l'histoire d'une jeune dame qui s'est fait abandonner par sa mère. Elle a laissé au milieu d'un aéroport. Et donc, elle appelle son père pour que son père lui dise, enfin, son père va lui dire, ok, bon, voilà, je suis là, je viens te chercher, bla, 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 bla. Parce que bon, comme sa mère l'a abandonné quelque part dans un aéroport, donc le père décide de venir la chercher avec, avec un, un, un jet privé pour commencer. Et, et, donc voilà, il est venu la chercher, ils sont partis la déposer chez elle. Il a bloqué tous les comptes, que ce soit euh, les comptes de sa maman. Il a tout bloqué. Il a, il a tout bloqué. Parce qu'il s'est dit, ouais, comment elle, une mère, peut prendre l'argent de sa fille et puis gaspiller. Et son excuse, on me dit, ouais, l'excuse de la mère, c'est que, ouais, bon, elle n'a pas besoin de savoir tout ça, tout et tout. Bon, elle n'a pas besoin de tout cet argent que son père lui a laissé. Pourtant, c'est l'argent de la fille, hein. C'est pas l'argent de la dame. Donc, vraiment, c'est quand même triste. Une fille de vivre quelque chose comme ça. Elle est là, elle essaie de s'en sortir. Et, et ça vraiment en tête tout bouffé pour lui donner. Donc, c'est un peu ça. C'est très complexe. Mais bon, on fait avec. On espère que ça va bien se terminer. Qu'elle va pardonner sa maman parce que bon, là, ils ont tout bloqué. Elle a un peu un kobo à son nom actuellement. Bon, on continue d'écouter.
Cut straight into my memory. Everything that should have belonged to me to secure my future had been turned by her into fuel for a life of luxury. I sat there, hands on my head, both furious and numb. Images flooded back, the cheap sandwiches I had to eat for lunch while classmates freely ordered from the cafeteria, the days I asked my mother for money to buy books only to be scolded and branded demanding. And now I learned that money had not simply vanished, it sat in colorful cocktails in Miami, in expensive bikinis my mother wore on the beach, in the seaside rental she and that man used to enjoy an extended honeymoon. My father did not interrupt as I shakily flipped through the pages, letting me face the truth. He silently observed, his expression containing a restrained anger I could feel in each heavy breath. Finally he laced his fingers together on the table and spoke slowly, with enough weight to make everyone in the room look up. Enough. I want all related accounts frozen immediately. The house in Decatur where she lives, reclaim it. Any assets purchased with Claire's trust funds, seal them all. No one objected. The lawyers nodded and typed rapidly, taking notes so fast their pens clicked on the paper. As for me, I sat there with my heart both racing and wrenching. On one hand, I felt protected to the point of tears. Finally, someone not only said you deserve better but acted, actually standing up to reclaim what had been taken from me. But another part of me sank. That part was my mother. The woman who had given me life was about to be cast out of the house, stripped of money, pushed into the street, all because of her own choices, and I could not help but feel as if I, too, held the knife. My father sensed that. He placed his solid, warm hand on my shoulder, transmitting a strength I had never known. Claire, he said, his look stern yet gentle, this is not revenge. This is about your safety. I will not allow her to use you as an excuse to spend or to invest illegally anymore. I will clear away every danger around you, so you can live like a child should. I looked at him, tears welling again but no longer from fear. For the first time in my life, I believed there was someone who would not merely speak but would actually act. And in that instant I no longer saw myself as the piece of luggage abandoned at the airport. I was a girl being pulled back into the light, promised a future no longer built on lies. The phone buzzed in my hand for so long that I almost let it go unanswered. But I swiped the screen anyway, not knowing if it was out of curiosity, pain, or some buried instinct to hear what she had to say. Immediately, the voice on the other end rang out, so familiar my chest tightened, but this time it wasn't cold and commanding. It was trembling, frantic, brittle like shattered glass. Claire! You have to come back to me. Listen to me, it was just a misunderstanding. Everything was a misunderstanding. I stayed silent, not answering right away. In that gap I could hear everything, her ragged breathing, the sound of a metal gate being pulled but not opening, even the muffled catch of a sob swallowed down. She was panicking, nothing like the woman who had once coolly pulled her Louis Vuitton suitcase through airport security without glancing back at me even once. I closed my eyes, and the image of that day came rushing back, me at 16, huddled in the middle of a crowded concourse, clutching a worn-out backpack, with only $52 in my pocket, while she held the hands of her husband's 2 children, radiant as though she were stepping into a perfect new life. No goodbye, no hug, not even a backward glance. And now, here she was, begging me to return, dressing it all up as a misunderstanding to erase the truth. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, listening as she repeated herself in desperation, "Come back, Claire, come back to me and we'll talk. Don't believe what they say. It was just a mistake. I never meant to abandon you." Every word was like a dull blade dragging across my heart, painful not because I believed her, but because I knew she would never admit the truth. I gripped the phone, took a long breath, and for the first time in my life I felt I was no longer the powerless child. She needed me, but I did not need her. That feeling was strange, bitter, and yet, liberating. In the warm glow of my father's house on Buckhead Hill, with his silhouette visible through the glass, I knew I finally had a place to stand. And in the silence I made for myself, I prepared to say the words I had never had the courage to speak, a refusal. The phone was still pressed to my ear, but this time I didn't let her trembling voice control me. I steadied my breathing, calmed my racing heart, and spoke slowly, each word etched into the air. "You left me at the airport." That wasn't a misunderstanding. I heard the thick silence on the other end, so heavy it pressed down on my chest like a stone. Then her voice burst through, rushed and broken. "No. Claire, you have to believe me. I only thought you were old enough to manage. I didn't mean. I never meant to leave you." It was a mistaken judgment. Her voice veered between pleading and excuse-making, as if twisting the truth could transform it into another story. But I was no longer that 16-year-old girl, trembling at the departure gate. I had heard enough. I let her words drift away, like the wind howling outside the windows of my new home. A few days later, my father took me back to the old house in Decatur to sign the final legal papers. As soon as the SUV stopped at the gate, I noticed a few neighbors scattered nearby, arms crossed, their eyes fixed on us. When the door opened and I stepped out, whispers rose, unhidden. The girl finally went back to her real father. The words, meant as a simple remark, struck me harder than a verdict. They confirmed a truth I had been forced to deny all these years. I was not a child abandoned by her father, but one stripped of the right to know he had always been there, waiting. My mother stood on the porch, her face ashen. There was no trace of the luxurious, proud bearing she had worn when she dragged her suitcase through security at the airport. She forced a smile, so strained it became distorted, but as the neighbors' whispers rose, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch and her eyes dart around as if searching for an escape. Her false mantle had been stripped away, there was nowhere left to hide. I stood beside my father, feeling his warm hand rest lightly on my shoulder. I did not need to say another word. My silence, combined with the neighbors' looks, was enough for her to understand that the balance had shifted. That day, for the first time, I was no longer the child who had to bow in shame. I stood tall and let her face the truth. The one exposed was not me, but her. And my silence, choked but resolute, became the most damning accusation. The courtroom lights glared fluorescent, but the air felt thick, as if every breath carried weight. I sat in the plaintiff's row, my hands cold though the air conditioning was not excessive. My father sat beside me, silent and steady like a rock, while his lawyer shuffled through thick files. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my heart hammered as if drums were beating in my head. The courtroom door opened and my mother entered. I had steeled myself, but the sight still made me pause. She had come alone. There was no sign of the new husband, no two smiling stepchildren, no designer clothes radiating pride. Instead, there was a gaunt woman, hair unkempt, a rumpled coat, eyes swollen as if from a sleepless night. She bowed her head as she walked in, steps hurried and trembling, then sank into the defendant's bench. When the judge called the hearing to order, my mother stood up abruptly, not waiting for her lawyer to speak. Her voice broke, trembling and sharp, echoing in the cold room, "I never meant to abandon the child. I have been under pressures no one can understand. I only thought Claire was old enough to fend for herself. I had no other choice." She kept wiping her eyes, the other hand waving as if trying to brush away an invisible accusation. I listened in silence, but every word she spoke tightened something in my chest. Not once did she accept responsibility. Not once did she say, "Yes, that was my fault." It was all blame placed on circumstances, on pressure, on some injustice that she claimed made her the victim. I watched her eyes sweep the room, searching for sympathy, then fix on me as if trying to extract forgiveness. "Claire," she croaked, voice twisted with desperation, "you must believe me. It was all just a big misunderstanding. You are everything to me, but I was driven into a corner. You can't abandon me now." Hearing that, my chest felt as if someone were squeezing it, not because I believed her, but because old memories rushed back. I clearly saw that day at the airport, her pulling a shiny Louis Vuitton suitcase, walking arm in arm with the new man and his 2 children. I saw myself at 16, curled up among the crowd with a worn backpack and $52 in my pocket, eyes waiting for a look, a glance back, yet there was nothing. That image replayed like a film stuck in my memory. And now, in the courtroom, I heard her call my name as if she had never left. Tears threatened, but I gritted my teeth and held them back. My father sat beside me and suddenly squeezed my hand, firm, warm, as if to remind me I was no longer alone. I looked up at him, met his calm, steady gaze, then turned back forward. I knew my moment had come. For the first time in my life, I would not be silent while others told my story. I would tell it myself. My mother's lawyer stood and, trying to keep calm though I could hear the strain breaking in each word, asked me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to me and spoke so it echoed through the courtroom, "Claire, do you truly want to cut yourself off from your mother completely? You will never get back what you once had. Are you sure this is what you want?" That question hit me like a cold gust. I hesitated for a moment. My heart seemed to be pulled 2 ways, one toward the image of the woman who gave me life, who had once held me and sung me to sleep, the other toward the stark truth of the day I was left at the airport, turned into a burden she did not want to carry. Tears welled up, I blinked to see clearly, but they still rolled down my cheeks. I felt unsteady, as if standing on a swaying suspension bridge. Just then my father tightened his grip on my hand. The squeeze wasn't strong, but enough to pass a sure weight into me, like an anchor line in the storm. I turned to him, met his look, calm, resolute, not pressuring me, only full of trust. That look said it all, you don't need to be afraid. You just need to speak your truth. I inhaled deeply, let the tears fall without letting them control my voice. I faced forward, looked directly at the judge, the lawyers, and at my mother. For the first time I spoke without trembling, I choose my father. I choose safety. A heavy silence spread through the courtroom, so dense I could hear my own heart pounding. My mother stared at me, her whole body collapsing inward, lips moving but unable to form words. Her lawyer faltered and lowered her eyes. The judge nodded, voice even indecisive. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, the court finds that the mother forfeits all financial control as well as legal guardianship rights over Claire Thompson. All rights are granted to the father. The gavel struck, its sound echoing through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, breathed in deeply, tears still falling but no longer as bitter. They were tears of release, for the first time choosing my own fate. My father still held my hand, not letting go, and in that moment I knew I had traveled the whole distance from the child abandoned at the airport to the girl who stood in court and made her choice. The courtroom door swung open with a soft thud, and afternoon light poured in like a simple, gentle miracle. My father stood first, gave my hand a light tug, and we walked out of the courthouse together, my steps still a little shaky but with a strange feeling inside, as if I had just shed a heavy coat. No more rustle of papers, no more scrutinizing looks from those inside the courtroom, instead there was a simple space where I could take a deep breath without feeling I had to hide anything. The cool air outside the courthouse seemed to wash away some of the dust of the days when I had been labeled the abandoned child, and I realized I was smiling, a small, unfamiliar smile, but one that came from inside rather than.
So that was it for tea time for today. It's the story of a girl that um, that you guys have with us. It was it was a very interesting story to say the least. You know, being abandoned in some airport. And now come to find out that her dad all along wanting to be with her, wanting to know her, wanting to be knowing to be part of that story. So it's sad, but it's it's what it is, right? It is what it is. You live, you learn. Um, you learn to know what's going on. You learn to know how people act, what people do, what people don't do. You know, it is sad, but it is what it is. You just have to live with it, and you just have to live with it. Accept it as the reality. So that the reality that we have to accept it as the reality. It's a other reality that we have to. It's it's actually it's a really sad story. It's it's actually it's a really sad story. But you know, you have to go with it. You have to accept it. But you know, you have to go with it. You have to accept. But that's okay. That's okay. We live, we learn. But that's okay. Now we know okay, we live what's we good. Live, we learn what's bad. So now we know what's good, what's bad. So it's a very interesting story to know that um we have to go through something like this. But we have to go through something like this. It it's what it is. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching the show. We see you next time. It's what it is. Bisous. Thank you.